because they failed. Listen, Arab nationalism failed, and the rulers that came and promised so much to the Arab world, they really did not fulfill their promises. And you have a lot of changes. So you had, mainly the population became restive. Islamism or political Islam became, again, a factor in the dynamics in the domestic and regional politics of the region. And of course, the economies. So and the Arab-Israeli conflict. So really, you had many factors, and this has led, as a matter of fact, for them to embrace, to start to project themselves as pious Muslims, and to go and seek refuge in Islam, mainly to legitimize themselves. And this is, I think, mainly the reason. And of course, their rule was, was authoritarian rule at the time, and all this conflict. Somehow, Islamism or political Islam became a force, in the Arab and Muslim world.
Buy my novel, Escape from the Village, from major booksellers online. Go to escapevillage.com. Subscribe to the Substack. Go to fountainheadforum.substack.com. Support the forum. Go to buymeacoffee.com/fountainheadforum. Thank you. Welcome to the Party Pal. This is Fountainhead Forum 255. Yes, we're at 8 bits. And I'm talking to Robert Rabil. He is a professor at Florida Atlantic University. He is originally from Lebanon. He speaks Lebanese and French. He's a professor, and we're going to talk about the situation in the Middle East with Lebanon, Syria, and some of the other countries, and hopefully get into some of the background involving this. How are you, Robert?
Thank you. Well, thank you for having me, Chris. Thank you.
It's great having you. My best guests are always people that I hear, that I discover on other shows, and so you bring this guy on. So this whole history. You were born in Lebanon, and you came to America. Have you lived anywhere else?
As a matter of fact, I can tell you this. My grandfather was born in the United States.
Okay.
The Rabil family left, Mount Lebanon in the 1880s.
Yeah.
And my grandfather wanted to visit the Holy Land and go to Mount Lebanon and Beirut, and he met this beautiful woman, and he revived the Rabil family in Mount Lebanon. And I was, the generation that was born in Lebanon.
Yeah. Where is Mount Lebanon? Is that a city or,
No, Mount Lebanon, the mountains. As a matter of fact, in Lebanon, you have the famous Mount Lebanon. This is where you have the cedars that they are mentioned in the Bible, and the cedars that the Phoenician used to build their boats, and the cedars that were used to build the Solomon Temple. This is where Mount Lebanon, and it's all across Lebanon, as a matter of fact.
When you say cedars, do you mean cedar trees?
Cedars tree, exactly.
Okay,
Absolutely.
I wanted to clarify that. Yes. Yeah. So that's pretty remarkable. So you have that hit, because there is actually a city in Pennsylvania called Mount Lebanon. So that's why I wanted to clarify that. I wasn't sure, but there's mountains there, which and of course there's a lot of deserts.
And you have Lebanon. You have a lot of Lebanon in New Hampshire because I have to tell you this, Chris. You have many American of Lebanese background.
Oh yes.
You have the Sununu, you have the Kodi, you have the Kuri, you have the Barak, mainly, and these are big families, but they got assimilated really well. Same like my family, nobody knows that the Rabils, and again, even the last name is not really, doesn't sound that Middle Eastern name. So, but they came here some time ago.
Yeah, well, I'm not an expert necessarily on name origins. So let's. First of all, I always like to back up and look at the history here because I've not really had to examine this history. So, and there's a whole lot of history here. I mean,
a lot of history.
People said, Jericho, for example, has been inhabited for 10,000 years, and you've got Damascus is a very old city, and in some of these other towns, So, let's go back, to the. Okay, we'll say 2,000 years ago, this land was occupied by the Roman Empire, Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, Israel, Jordan, Turkey, that was all occupied. So Egypt, that was owned by the Roman Empire. So then what happened after the Roman Empire is eventually let me tell you this, just a little bit history of Lebanon.
let's not forget, you have to mention the Phoenicians. The Phoenician originated from Lebanon, from the coast, from what's today Byblos.
What time were the Phoenicians?
The Phoenicians, they were 2000 BCE, and then you go back to 1000, and then they were under different dynasties. So they said, I would say until 400 BCE.
As part of my rebellious nature in math class, they'd always use those Greek letters for the Greek alphabet. I got rebellious and said, okay, I'm going to use Phoenician letters. So I thought the Phoenician alphabet was really cool. So yeah.
Well, the Phoenician alphabet, they are the basis of our alphabet here.
Yes, I can imagine. Yeah, you see the origins. Yeah, so the Phoenicians were there, and
the Phoenicians, they're there, and you have the other dynasty. Lebanon was invaded by Beni dynasty, and then especially me, when I look at the Middle East, I start looking at the Greek. When Alexander the Great invaded this area in 330. He defeated the Persian at Persepolis, and his general, as a matter of fact, really ruled the Middle East. And after the Greek, and after, of course, they introduced the Hellenistic culture in the Middle East, then the Romans. The Romans were, more ambitious, more disciplined, and they, again, were Hellenized. And they ruled the Middle East, as a matter of fact, for quite some time. And after Rome was sacked by the Visigoths in 410, you have the Byzantines, because the Roman Empire split in 395 between Eastern Europe and Western Europe. So when Western Europe fell, mainly Rome fell, you have the Eastern Europe, and the Eastern Europe were the Byzantine, and the Byzantine ruled that area until the Arab conquest, and the Arab conquest took place in the 7th century.
The Arab conquest was
in the 7th century, and then after that, the Arabs, different dynasty. You had the Umayyad dynasty, then you had the Abbasid dynasty and other dynasty, and then the Ottoman came. The Ottoman came in 1280. 1280, as they moved into Europe first, they were based in today Turkey. They moved into Europe, and in 1516 they conquered the Middle East. And from 1516, 1518 until 1918, you had 400 years of Ottoman rule. So this is why the Ottoman, and what's today Turkey, as you mentioned, it's extremely important. It had the history, it had the legacy, it had the cultural, political, military, you name it. And as a matter of fact, the system in Lebanon really originated, we can trace it to the Ottoman Empire.
Yes. So it went from the Byzantine, and then to the Turks, and then in 1560.
And then 1918, the Ottoman Empire lost, the British and the French. The British took Iraq and Palestine, and the French took Syria and Lebanon. Mainly they had the mandate. And the mandate, the concept was, we are going to rule you until you are ready to rule yourself. So now what do you have? And in the 1943, Lebanon took its independence. 1946, Syria took its independence, and Israel proclaimed its independence in 1948.
Yeah, was it ever under the Islamic Empire or not?
Which one?
You said the Islam conquest was.
It was under the Muslim rule, of course. Yeah. The Umayyad dynasty was a Muslim dynasty. The Abbasid dynasty was a Muslim dynasty, and as a matter of fact, the Ottoman Empire was a Muslim dynasty. Now for Christian and Jews, because they were considered as people of the book or recipient of divine revelation, they were welcome there, but they had to pay a jizya, or they had to pay a head tax, so as to be protected and so as not to be conscripted in the Muslim army.
So the Christians and the Jews had to pay a tax, but they couldn't be drafted. So
no. As a matter of fact, the jizya, or the head tax, partly was for them to be dhimmi, mainly in the protection of the Muslim empire or the Muslim dynasty, and the second thing, they don't be conscripted in the Muslim army, whether the Umayyad, Abbasid, or the Ottoman.
Okay, so everybody could still be drafted then. Okay.
Now, during World War II, during World War I, you had, in Lebanon, they used forced conscription. Yes. Now, this is different now.
So we're getting a picture.
For a very small period of time before the collapse, mainly before the defeat of the Ottoman Empire, they had some policies. They were mainly harsh against the Christian of the Middle East, especially the Maronite Christian, because they were worried. The Christian had historically a good relationship with France. And during World War I, they were worried, the Ottoman, they were worried about collaboration between the Christians of Lebanon and the French. And this is why they kind of were a little bit harsh. Mainly, they were kind of very strict with the Christians of Lebanon.
Yeah, because Lebanon was still, pretty much, split, I think, half and half, at least, between, Muslim and Christian at the time, maybe 100 years ago. Whereas Syria and some of the other countries are almost mostly Muslim.
Correct. Lebanon, as a matter of fact, during the independence of Lebanon, the Christian were more than 50%. But with time, they became a plurality, and now they are not the majority. You have in Lebanon now, you have Shia Muslim, Sunni Muslims, a little bit Alawi Muslim. You have Druze offshoot of Shia Islam, and you have the Christian. And the Christian, they are Maronite Catholic. You have the Orthodox, and you have a little bit Protestant.
Yeah, what about the, I think they're called the Yazidis? What are those?
Yazidi, as a matter of fact, the Yazidi, they are mainly in Iraq. And mainly, if you go back to their history and their ideology, mainly their theology, really they believe that Satan is a fallen angel, and at a certain time is going to be reconciled with God. And this is why ISIS and other, for example, in the Middle East, they consider them as devil worshipper. And this is why they went and they attacked them. ISIS, or the Islamic State, attacked them, enslaved their women. They were really terrible with the Yazidi. But the Yazidi, mainly, they are not devil worshipful. They really look at the peacock as they venerate the peacock in the same way, the Indian venerate the cows. So really, it's kind of mainly when you go in Islamist fundamentalists, they have different views about some minorities there in the Middle East.
Yeah, I've heard that the persecution of the Yazidis is probably as bad as anything, or at least maybe
terrible. As a matter of fact, they're women. They enslaved them, they traded them. It was terrible, and they killed many of them. Terrible, awful.
This is one thing that I've always, I've heard other people say, the term, the people of the book, because Islam, Judaism, and Christianity all go back to Abraham.
Exactly, absolutely right.
And Abraham was, well, we don't really know when he lived, but before David, before the first Joseph, before all these people in the Bible. It's basically.
Well, I can tell you this chronologically. As a matter of fact, the Muslims, or Prophet Muhammad, and his message is believed to complete the previous messages God gave to mainly to first the Jews and then to the Christians. And then Muhammad came as a seal of prophets, meaning that it completed all the divine revelation given to the people of the book. And the people of the book are Christian and Jews.
Yeah. Jesus is mentioned. I have not read the Quran, but I've heard that Jesus.
No, Jesus is mentioned as Isa, but Jesus is not considered as the Son of God. He is considered as a prophet.
Yeah, just a prophet. The same way that Abraham was a prophet, or Abraham was a prophet, or David was maybe a prophet, or in addition to being a king, lots of people who were prophets. So what do you one thing I do want to ask, what caused the decline of the golden age of Islam, in your opinion? What happened? I mean, there was amazing mathematicians, for example. I mean, the word algebra comes from Arabic. We had amazing mathematicians, great advancements in philosophy, and this area, around the 800s or so, like Baghdad was very much a center of learning. I think it's the University of Baghdad.
Absolutely right.
all this intellectual activity, and a lot of Greek classics, for example, survive only in Arabic because of this legacy. It was a at the time, very advanced culture, and then it seemed to have.
I'm gonna give you two reasons because
time. What happened?
I'm going to give you two reasons because it's a very broad question, but I'm going to give you two reasons are very important and critical to the decline of the Arab, mainly of the Muslim dynasty. The invasion of Baghdad by Hulagu, the grandson of Genghis Khan, the Mongols. He went into Baghdad, and Baghdad was the capital of the Abbasid dynasty. And that was in 1258. That was a great dynasty. And he raised it to the ground. He raised it to the ground. He did what the Roman did to Carthage. You know what I mean? It's written in history, Carthage, how big it was. And the Roman really, when they used to invade a city or a country, they would give certain exceptions here and there.
Yeah.
Now, what the Roman did to Carthage, the Mongols did to the Arabs. They raised it to the ground. So this is one big reason. And as a matter of fact, there are scholars even today that will mention really the Arabs did not fully recover from that defeat, by the Mongols, really, because he burned the largest library at the time, and he really kind of defeated them in a way it's unbelievable. And second, the internecine fighting, the rivalry and competition among Muslim small dynasty, sheikdoms, similar to what happened to the Roman Empire. So these are mainly the two reasons, and of course other factors as well. But these are, I think, from my perspective, these are the two most important reasons for the decline of the Muslim dynasty. Now you have to consider one thing: the Ottoman Empire came, and the Ottoman Empire, let's not forget, at two times it laid siege to Vienna. Vienna was the capital of Europe. But by then, by the 17th century, Europe, after, of course, the invasion or the conquer of a new land and taking the wealth back there, became strong. And they were able to defeat the Ottoman Empire. And after that defeat, mainly the Ottoman Empire went on a declining path. And in 1774, this is, again, a date, it relates to me. Why? Because this is when the Ottoman Empire fought the Russian Empire, or the Tsarist Russia. And in 1774, this is when Tsarist Russia defeated the Ottoman Empire and took Crimea. That was the Crimean War. And this is why I always said Putin will never give back Crimea. Crimea always was, Russians. The Russians expended a lot of blood to have it. And it's historical, you know what I mean?
I can imagine that, the historic, because, how many wars have Russia and Turkey fought? I mean, it's is it 20 or in the 20s somewhere? There have been so many little wars, or maybe you could say they're all just one, but I guess you could have different definitions of wars, little wars or big wars. But they've been, they fight over the Black Sea, they fight over the Dardanelles, it's just been, you might have more wars between these two countries than anything.
As a matter of fact, I can tell you this, Chris, in the 18th and 19th century, you had three big empires around this area, mainly what's today, I would say, North Africa, Asia, and Europe. You had the Ottoman Empire, you have the Persian Empire, and you have the Tsarist Russia, or the Russian Empire. In the 19th century, Russia was the most powerful, and it took a lot of lands from what's today Turkey, from what's then the Ottoman Empire and Persia. You mentioned Armenia, you mentioned Azerbaijan, me when I was talking to you. At one time, they belonged to the Persian Empire.
Yeah, it's really remarkable because you have these, and I know the last assault on Vienna, I think, was in 1453. Is that right?
1453. As a matter of fact, that was the defeat and the seizure of Constantinople.
Yeah,
and the last one that took place in 1683. 1683, that was the last siege of Vienna, where the Europe really expelled the Ottoman army.
But it was somewhat of a gradual process, because Spain kicked out as they call them, the Moors, and that was the Ottoman Empire in 1492. And there was a gradual losses. I mean, Turkey captured Constantinople when?
In 1453.
Okay, 1453 is when they cut.
1453. You have this is when Turkey took Constantinople. 1529. This is when Suleiman the Magnificent went and laid siege to Vienna, the first siege of Vienna, and he withdrew. He was not defeated, but he had to withdraw. And then the second siege of Vienna, 1683. This is when Europe became strong and really pushed, the Ottoman away. And from that time, and especially after 1774, their defeat at the Russian hands, they were, we call the decline of the Ottoman Empire. And you had what we call, in academia, the Eastern question. And the Eastern question was about what you are going to do with the Ottoman Empire. Should European power go and defeat it and divvy up its territories? And mainly what allowed the Ottoman Empire to stay is the rivalry and the competition among and between European powers.
Yeah.
And then you had World War I, And after World War I, the Ottoman Empire was defeated.
You talked about earlier. You talked about some of the battles among the the Muslim states. When did some of these divisions start to show? I mean, for example, when did you get Sunnis and Shiites?
All right. As a matter of fact, the split in Islam between Sunni and Shia, you can trace it mainly to what we call the succession of Prophet Muhammad.
Yes.
You have to understand one thing. When Prophet Muhammad died in 632, he did not nominate a successor. A successor meaning Khalifa. And this is where the word caliph comes in. So it took some time, you know what I mean? And nobody nominated a successor, a caliph. And then you had a caliph that became a ruler, and he's the one who established the Umayyad dynasty. And he's the one, mainly, he nominated his son, Yazid, as a caliph. Now, who got very unhappy with that? Imam Hussein, the grandson of Prophet Muhammad. Why? You have the partisans of Ali. And if you want to translate it to Arabic, mean Shi'at Ali. And this is where the word Shia come from. The partisans of Ali, and Ali was the son-in-law and the first cousin of Prophet Muhammad. Mainly, so what happened is that Imam Hussein refused to accept Yazid as a caliph, and he fought him in Karbala. And this battle took place in 680 in Karbala. What's Karbala today? Karbala is a big city, or second holiest city in Iraq. And there, this is where Imam Hussein and the family of the Prophet and his followers were killed. Even Imam Hussein was decapitated at the hand of Yazid. And this pronounced the split in Islam in 680, mainly between Sunni and mainly, which means it comes from the word Sunnah, which means the customs and tradition of Prophet Muhammad, and the Shia, which I traced it mainly Shi'at Ali, and now became Shia. And this became the split. And then, the Sunni or the caliphs, they are the one who held the power. Really, you had some dynasty, and now you have problems. The Umayyad dynasty was defeated by the Abbasid, but the Umayyad, they established really a great dynasty in Spain, and they had what called, the golden age of Spain. I would say from 700 to 900. You had 250 years. But then again, the Moors, they were there, and little by little, the Umayyad started to become weak. On the other hand, in what's today Baghdad and the Levant and North Africa, they were under the control of the Abbasid dynasty. And the Abbasid dynasty was defeated mainly, as I mentioned to you, by the Mongols. And after that, the Mongols, and some of them, as a matter of fact, or who came from Asia, you had the Seljuk, and then the Turkic people. The Turkic people, they established themselves in what's today Turkey, and they became Muslims. And the Mongols became Muslims. So this is how Islam appealed to them. And what happened after that? The Turkic established the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire, mainly it was named the Ottoman Empire on account of their leader, Osman. So this is why they were called Ottoman. And the Ottoman ruled. The Ottomans, as I mentioned to you, ruled in Europe and Turkey today. And then from 1518 to 1918 in the whole Middle East. And they were mainly the main power in the Middle East. Now, the Persian Empire, you had the Persian Empire, Safavid Empire in the 16th century, and the Qajar dynasty, mainly I would say in the 18th, but mainly 19th century. The Persian Empire became a majority Muslim under the Safavid dynasty, and that took place in the 16th century.
Okay, so what was the dominant religion in Persia or Iran before that? Was it Zoroastrianism or?
Well, yes, Zoroastrianism before Islam, and then you had Islam, really, then by 16th century you had really a mass conversion to Shia Islam.
Yeah, and Zoroastrianism is actually very, very old.
Very old, as a matter of fact.
Some people they're still tolerated there, I guess.
Yes,
is that right? Or
very old. Very old.
Yeah, and I know there's also long been a Jewish community in Iran as well, and there still is one there yet. So,
sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So and there's been various Jewish communities all around what the Ottoman Empire was. When Spain said we don't want the Jews here anymore in 1492.
Correct.
The Ottoman Empire said yes, we'll take them. So
correct.
So the Ottoman Empire. Also, I know there's another sect in Oman. What's that sect of? branch of.
Okay, in Oman you have Sunni and Shia.
Yeah.
You have Zaidi Shia and Okay, you have Zaidi Shia Muslim, and you have Shafi'i Sunni Muslim. And this is the only sect of Shia who are mainly present in Oman, and out of which we are seeing the Houthi movement. They are Zaidi Shia.
Yeah. So okay, so we're getting up to the area. So we've got Shiites in Iran and maybe a little bit elsewhere, but still mostly
in Iraq. In Iraq, they are a majority. Bahrain, they are a majority. A minority in Saudi Arabia, minority in Kuwait. A big sect in Lebanon. You know what I mean?
Was it always this way, or because it sounds like the Shiites took over in Iran and then kind of spread out, or
well, as a matter of fact, but they're still a minority. The Sunni are the majority across the world, even in the Middle East. But where they are a majority, they are an Irani majority.
Yeah.
In Bahrain, but Bahrain is a very small country. They are a majority, really. They are 70% and 30% Sunni. But in the other places in the Middle East, they are not the majority. They could be plurality in Iraq.
Yes.
You know what I mean? In Lebanon, they are around 35%. Kuwait, 15 to 20%. Saudi Arabia, 12 to 15%. UAE, you have some Shia, very little. Oman, again, very little. They are a minority. And of course, you have the Hazara in Pakistan and Afghanistan. You have Shia minority in Pakistan and Afghanistan.
Yeah.
Now, let me tell you this before I forget. It's very important, and very few people, and mainly not too many people know it. The second largest community of Shia in the world, guess what it is? It is in India. India has 60 million Shia today. Second largest 12er Shia majority in the world after Iran. It's not in the Middle East, it's in India.
Well, there's lots of people in India. So So okay, so let's get up to the events leading up to the World War I. I know there was, the Ottoman Empire is starting to fall apart. There's various independence movement in the Balkans in the late 1800s. I believe I've also heard, too, that Russia actually helped reestablish some of the Orthodox churches in the Balkans, such as Bulgaria and Serbia, and that's why Russia has been somewhat protective of that area, because they see the Orthodox Christians as their natural allies. So World War I starts. First of all, why is the Ottoman Empire on the side of Germany, Austria, and is it because they want to get the Balkan territories back, or what was their motivation?
As a matter of fact, it was this, but also you have other factors. And mainly, I did a lot of research on it, and I studied the Ottoman Empire and its relation with the Middle East. Mainly in the British, the British and the Ottoman became very upset, mainly in the 19th century, when Britain mainly, indirectly took control of Egypt. And Egypt was very important. And the British, they didn't help them, during the Balkan Wars. So really, you had then you have a lot of reservation against each other. France was always, at odds. France, let's not forget. Let me put it to you in perspective. 1798, the first invasion, of the Ottoman Empire in the Middle East. 1798, Napoleon invaded Egypt, and he projected himself as a liberator. The British get upset, and of course, they were worried about their Indian ambition there. And what happened is that the British, they were the one with the Ottomans, they fought Napoleon. And Napoleon, by 1801, and his army left Egypt. Who came after that? Little by little, the Egyptians. So the Egyptian had the power in Egypt. Now, you go to North Africa, for example, in Algeria. In Algeria, you had a lot of war. And between 1830 to 1836, the French had complete control. And not only that, they made Algeria a French department. Mainly, it's equivalent to making Algeria a province of France. And then Morocco fell, and Tunisia fell, and all this country fell. So here now, the Ottoman Empire is not going to do anything with France. And it got very upset, furious with Great Britain. And then Germany, you had an ambassador and you had some diplomats. They were very savvy. And they were able to say, listen, we are going to help you. We are going to build your army, your navy. And the Ottoman felt that really,
Yeah.
they were more safe in the German hand. Why again? Because the Russians, let's not forget, the Russians again, they had some problems with the Ottomans on account, partly on account of their support to the Armenians, and on account of, you had a lot of issues between the Russians and the Ottoman Empire. The Russians taking Ottoman lands. So the only party now is that, from the perspective of the young Turks, mainly the three leaders at the time, mainly Germany offered, for them the best, kind of an alliance.
Yeah, the Ottoman
And
Empire
they
also.
lost.
Yeah, the Ottoman Empire also had a short war, I think, in 1912 with Italy, because Italy took Libya, and Italy also
Correct.
took
In 1911, started
Italy
in
also
1911.
took some of
Correct.
those islands like Rhodes,
Correct.
islands which now are part of Greece, but Italy took some islands away from the Turks. At that point too. So and of course Italy, because Italy was allied with France and England and Britain and Russia during World War I as well. So the Germans gave the Ottomans a better deal, and so the Germans took the side. So World War I starts, and this is where it almost immediately doesn't look like it's good. But there were various succession movements. Bulgaria, Greece, Albania, Romania. The countries that would become Yugoslavia and then not be Yugoslavia again, all got their independence, and they were actually afraid the Armenians might try to go independent as well, which is why they initiated the genocide, as you said. Yeah.
Yes, they were worried about the Armenians seceding. Correct. And they're mainly, they're dealing with the Russians.
Yeah, and from what I've heard also is that Armenia was actually there were Armenians in a lot more areas than there are now. What you might have considered Armenia at the time, for example, had access to the Black Sea, and then there were.
Well, yes, you had. Listen, you have the good number of Armenians. As a matter of fact, in Constantinople, the intellectuals, you had a lot of Armenians. The Armenians were all known as intellectual. But what happened, during the genocide? During the war, 1915, as a matter of fact, this is the high of it, 1915.
Yeah.
This is when they pushed them all in what direction? In the direction of the Syrian desert. Many of them died in the Syrian desert. And then they ended up where? In Syria and in Lebanon. And in Lebanon, for example, I grew up, with many Armenians.
Yes. So there was the Armenian genocide, and then the war and the war was not going well at all for the Turks.
No. No. And really, as a matter of fact, Mount Lebanon, the Christians suffered a lot. The Ottoman Empire imposed, some kind of a restriction to food there, and many of them died of famish, of malnutrition, of epidemics. And this is why, you have a good number, I would say, of Maronite Catholics and Armenians. They still have reservations. But Turkey, I would say, later on, did not get involved in Lebanon. It started to get involved mainly, I would say, when the AKP, when Erdogan came to power. This is when, in the 1990s, they started to be involved mainly in Lebanon a lot. And I would say in the Middle East, where you have Turkic, people. And in Lebanon now, they have a very good influence, the Turk there.
Yeah, and as you said, Turkic people actually came from the east. They had
the Turkic people, as a matter of fact, early on, the first wave, or the first couple of waves, they came from Asia, like the Mongols. They were from Turkic tribes.
Yeah.
They came, and also before them, as a matter of fact, you have the Seljuks. The Seljuks came before them, and then the Turkic came after. And then they had a lot of people living with them, and you have other people, and especially when it became an empire, really.
And the Turkic people settled in Turkey. They settled in the Caucasus region. Did they settle anywhere else, like Turk?
Well, as a matter of fact, listen, you have to understand one thing. When the Ottoman took control, they lived. I wouldn't say, for example, I'll take the case of Syria and Lebanon. I wouldn't say that the Turkic people, were the majority. No, but mainly they were the Muslim rulers, and as Muslims, people follow them. So they got married there. In Lebanon, you have a lot of, Turkic family there. They are Lebanese today, but if you go back, they were Turkic. They get married, they settled there. In Syria, you have many of them. You have, for example, Al-Adham family. Al-Adham at one time, one of the biggest Sunni family. It traces its heritage to Turkey, mainly being, of Turkic stock.
Yes, of course. Yes, the Turkic people also live in Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan.
Yeah, you have them. As a matter of fact, the Uyghur people, listen, you have in Central Asia, you have many trace their background to the Turkic people. You have Azerbaijan, you have Turkmenistan. Turkmenistan, it's called Turkmenistan, mainly the land of the Turkmen. This is what it is. You have in Uzbekistan, you have in Kazakhstan, you have a good number of Turkic people there, a good number of Turkic people. But today they are what they are. Many. When you say Kazakhstan, you say this is the land of the Kazan. If you say Turkmenistan of Kyrgyzstan or Afghanistan, the land of the Afghan. Pakistan, the land of the Pakistani. So really, but they have a good number. The Uyghur Muslims in China, they trace against their heritage to being of a Turkic stock.
So the Ottoman Empire still has the land that's known as Syria, Lebanon, Israel, Jordan, Iraq, Kuwait, and
the whole Middle East,
some strips,
North Africa.
So they decided to divide up the empire after the war. That was the Treaty of Sèvres or something like that.
Sykes-Picot.
Okay.
The French and the British in 1915, 1916, they met together and they divided the Middle East into sphere of influence.
Yeah.
And based on this, as a matter of fact, when the Ottoman Empire mainly was defeated, the modern country, really emerged out of the ashes of the Ottoman Empire.
Yes.
And in line with the division of the Middle East by the British and the French.
Yes, and so after when all this spread up, Lebanon and Syria became a French mandate.
Exactly.
Israel and
Palestine became a British mandate. Mainly Iraq became a British mandate. Jordan was established by the British, and then Israel took its independence in 1948. Lebanon 1943 and Syria 1946.
And I believe Oman was also an English colony.
Listen, the Gulf, as a matter of fact, you have to consider the Gulf, mainly what you have, what's today, you have UAE, Qatar, Bahrain, Oman, and big part of Yemen. They mainly took their independence in the 1960s and 1970s. They were British protectorates. The only country in the Gulf that really took its independence and was able to establish itself early on is Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia established itself as a kingdom in 1932.
Yeah, and of course Egypt and Sudan were also English colonies.
They were, yes. And as a matter of fact, if you go back to Nasser is the one in the 1950 who nationalized the Suez Canal. They were all under the British. Even after the independence of Egypt, you have King Farouk. King Farouk was removed by the free officer. Nasser came to power, and in 1956 he nationalized the Suez Canal. The Suez Canal, really, it was built by the French and the British, and the British had one of the biggest bases in Ismailia in Egypt.
Yeah, Iran and Afghanistan were never colonies, but
Iran, as a matter of fact, during World War II, it was invaded by the British and by the Russians.
Okay,
it was invaded by both, and during the Qajar dynasty, it was very weak. Iran, very, very weak. And this is why the Shah of Iran was an officer in the Qajar army, and he carried out a coup d'etat, and he established, and the name now no longer was the Persian Empire. It became Iran, or the land of the Aryans.
And of course sometime during all this also they discovered oil in some of these places.
And this is why the British stayed there, and this is why the British, as a matter of fact, in the 1950, when Mossadegh nationalized the oil industry, the British kept after United States for 1 year. until we came, and we supported them, and we carried out the coup d'etat, which we helped, remove the nationalist government of Mossadegh and bring the Shah back.
And so I've also heard, and one critical moment, of course, was in 1917. There was the Balfour Declaration, which said, "Well, we're going to help establish a
Jewish state." Yes, the Balfour Declaration was a promise to the Jewish people for establishing a Jewish state.
Yes.
They didn't say how big and how this, mainly in Palestine. And the Balfour Declaration was incorporated in the mandate system when the Britain got the mandate over Palestine.
And I've also heard too, though, that apparently, the Palestinians were promised independence as well. So it's almost like they promised this land to both sides.
Well, I can tell you this. Now, under the British mandate, of course, you have the Jews. They are going back to Palestine under the British mandate. And you have tension between the two. In 1936, the British came and they sent a fact-finding commission to Palestine to see how they're going to resolve it. And they sent a Lord Peel. And this came to be the mainly Lord Peel Commission. And in that recommendations that he did, as a matter of fact, he recommended the partition of Palestine into a Jewish homeland and an Arab homeland. The Arabs rejected it. And the Jews, yes, they accepted it. That was the first partition of Palestine under the British. And the second one happened, under the United Nations in 1947. Again, at the time after World War II, the United Nations sent a fact-finding commission there, and they decided, they gave their recommendation again for the partition of Palestine between a Jewish homeland and a Palestinian Arab homeland. Again, the Arab did not accept. The Jews accepted, and this began what we call the first stage of the war in November 1947. And the Palestinians lost.
So from what I hear, before the breakup of the Ottoman Empire, everybody pretty much got along, though, right? I mean, the Jews and the Christians and the Muslims all pretty much got along.
As a matter of fact, the Ottoman Empire, I can tell you something about the Ottoman Empire. They did not single out a minority. For example, in Europe, they singled out the Jews. And under the Ottoman Empire, of course, you did not have equality, no, but you had some kind of tolerance, and they didn't get involved in the personal relationship, mainly in the affairs of the community. For example, the Jews, they had their own, rabbi, chief rabbi in Istanbul, for the Catholic again, for the Orthodox again. But you have to consider one thing, once the Ottoman Empire became weak, this is where they started to shift and to worry, about the minorities' relationship with foreign powers.
Yes. So as soon as the Balfour Declaration, it seems like also there was there any violence? When did the violence start in what we call Israel now, Israel and Palestine?
Well, mainly it started, I would say the first revolt took place in 1936. What's called as the Arab revolt. 1919, you had tension, and that tension led to the revolt in 1936. And this is what I mentioned. This is when the British said, okay, we are going to go and see how we are going to resolve this. And this is why I mentioned to you, their recommendation was to partition Palestine into a Jewish homeland and into a Palestinian homeland. The Palestinians rejected.
The Palestinians rejected it, yes.
Yes.
And so there wasn't really what was their motivation for rejecting that partition?
Because they felt that the Jews, they didn't belong there. They felt that why they want to mainly share from their perspective. What changed their land with the Jews?
So what changed their perspective, though? Was it just because there were more Jews there, or was it because there were?
No, well, they did not change. As a matter of fact, you have some now, like Hamas, really, and part of the problem, they feel that they cannot reconcile themselves, or at least some, with a Jewish homeland, and this has been a problem. For example, with Hezbollah, with Iran, really, they didn't reconcile really themselves with a Jewish homeland.
But Jews lived there before, and they were okay with
Of
being
course, as a matter of
ruled by
listen,
the Ottoman Turks.
the
Yes.
Jews, they were living there and they were expelled. Of course, you had the first destruction of the temple, the second destruction of the temple in 70 by the Romans, and then in 135 they have the Bar Kokhba revolt. The Bar Kokhba revolt, they revolted against the Romans, and the Romans, they defeated them and they expelled them. Now, once they were expelled, it didn't mean that they didn't have Jews that remained in Palestine, because the Roman named it as Palestina. So, for example, in Jerusalem, you always had Jews. In Safed, you have all the Jews. But now, since they were all expelled, many of them were expelled, now you have a majority of the non-Jews there. And this remained so until the British, took the mandate over Palestine, and you have more Jews going to Palestine, and this has created a problem, and those problems led to wars, and the Arabs lost, and the Palestinians lost.
So you had some violence in 1936, and was that was just various terrorist groups who were on what sides then in 1936.
Well, as I mentioned to you, the Palestinians, they fought against the British and they fought against the Jews.
Yeah, okay.
But
was anybody helping?
The British defeated that. And in 1939, you had the war.
Yeah, and then World War II.
And World War I erupted in 1939.
Yeah, the war. Yeah, so, and then of course, also was there increased immigration of Jews to Israel?
Of course, yes.
What was happening? Because what was happening in Germany and Europe with.
Yes. In the 1930s, you have many Jews that made the Aliyah. Mainly they went to Israel. They went to at the time Palestine.
Yeah, and was there any more violence over there after that, or
You had tension always. You have simmering tension, always, and you had tensions. Yes, really, yes.
Yeah,
and the Arabs, as a matter of fact, again, as I mentioned in 1947, the recommendation of the United Nations became a United Nations Security Council resolution, the resolution of November 1947. But the Arabs, again, the Palestinians rejected the partition, and this led to the war.
Yeah, and
in that war, mainly, when the Arab army invaded in 1948, the Jews were able to stop them and defeat them and declare the independence mainly in May 1948. So May 1948, Ben Gurion proclaimed or declared the independence of the Jewish state, whereas before you had Arab volunteer going to fight the Jews. Now the Arab army moved in. The Arab armies by 1949, they were all either defeated or stopped in their tracks.
Who were some of the countries in that war? There was Egypt, there was Jordan,
Jordan, Iraq, Lebanon, Syria.
Okay, so they all got involved and they all lost.
They all lost. Listen,
there was some other insurgency, though. For example, there was the King David hotel bombing and things like that.
This is now. You have two groups, the Irgun and another group that I forgot its name. And this is when, they felt that the British kind of, they were not accommodating Jewish aspirations. They were worried. And as a matter of fact, it was members of either Irgun or Stern group that carried out the attack on the the David Hotel.
Were they just conducting things against British, or were they also, engaging?
No, mainly at the time. Okay, well, you have to consider at the time, in Israel, you have mainly Ben Gurion. Ben Gurion was the main leader, really. Yes. But also you have other groups that Ben Gurion had some issue with them, and Begin was one of them, and Shamir was one of them.
Yes.
And such a group, as I mentioned to you, they were not happy with the British. They were worried about the British, and they carried out the attacks on the British. Ben Gurion did not have nothing to do with them. And then, things changed once the Arabs, once the British left. Let's not forget, the British left in May 1948. And once the British left, or they lowered their flag, to have staff in Palestine, This is when Ben Gurion declared the independence of Eretz Israel, and this is when the Arab armies invaded.
Yeah, and of course,
they lost.
Shamir and Begin later became prime ministers themselves.
And Begin became prime minister, and Shamir became prime minister.
Yeah. And so, okay, so then after that war's over. And then what else? And is there any other fighting going on anywhere else, or right now it's just confined to Israel?
Well, as a matter of fact, it's not about fighting, it's about, the emergence of a new state and the struggle to build the state. In Syria, you have a lot of coup d'etat. You have a Zaim coup d'etat, you have Shishakli the coup d'etat, until after some time, the Baas came and had the coup d'etat in 1963. And from 1963 until recently, you had the Baas party in Syria.
Yeah. So did what happened with some of these countries after they got independence? Syria, Lebanon, did they just? I know, Jordan just got a monarchy, and which is still there. And
all right, as a matter of fact, I can tell you, Lebanon had under the British, under the French, 1943, it was a democratic country. Syria, first, it was a parliamentary democracy. In Lebanon, it was quiet. It was okay. It was fine. In Syria, you have a coup d'etat, and the first one to carry out a coup d'etat was someone who, mainly an officer by the name of Zaim, and he carried out a coup d'etat. And Syria really went into one coup d'etat after coup d'etat until the Baas party came to power, and especially after Hafiz al-Assad became a president in 1970. 1971 became president. In Lebanon, you had issues. In Lebanon, mainly because it is not a homogeneous society. You have the Christian and the Muslim. And the Christians, somehow supported the West. For example, Camille Chamoun, at the time, the president in the 1950, supported the Eisenhower Doctrine. You have mainly two countries in the Middle East that supported or signed on the Eisenhower Doctrine, Iraq and Lebanon. In Iraq, immediately after that, you had the coup d'etat, and the nationalists came to power. And in Lebanon, you had a war between, broadly speaking, the Pan-Arabists and the Christians. And then the Marines went to Lebanon in 1958, and they diffused the crisis. And from 1958 to 1975, until the eruption of the civil wars that lasted 15 years, Lebanon was split. Yes, Lebanon at one time, and called the Switzerland of the Middle East, of the Paris of the Middle East. But you had a lot of problems simmering. And it came all in the open in 1975. The Christians more with the West, and the Muslim, broadly speaking, more supportive of the Palestinian question and their orientation toward the Arab world.
Why didn't the Kurds ever get their own independent state?
As a matter of fact, the Kurds, really, if you go to the Treaty of Sèvres, early on, it spoke about a homeland for the Kurds. But then you have Ataturk, Ataturk, at the end of the war, World War I, he was able to impose his authority, and he wasn't going to give any land to the Kurds. And more so when the British established Iraq, mainly, you did not have an Iraq. You have 3 Ottoman provinces. You have Mosul in the north, Kurdish majority. You have Baghdad, you have the Baghdad province, Sunni majority, and you have Basra, Shia majority there. Now, the British came and they felt for 2 factors. The first factor, they felt that the Kurds, were tribal and mainly they were fighting with each other. And second, they found oil. And third, as a matter of fact, which is most important, they felt that if we're going to bring together those 3 provinces, we put a man, and they put a man, the Hashemite by King Faisal. And so to have more of a presence and, of course, a power influence in Iraq. So here you have the 2 reasons, mainly the 2 reasons: Iraq under British influence, and of course Turkey. Turkey absolutely didn't want to see a Kurdish state. Absolutely not. Then and now. Now, as a matter of fact, in Syria, the biggest challenge for peace, or the biggest threat for peace today in Syria, is really what the new rebels, the rebels now, they are fighting with the Kurds now. And Turkey, openly doesn't want the Kurds to have autonomy or to have a state.
Yes, and so I didn't realize the Marines intervened in the U.S.
And
Marines
in 1958. Eisenhower sent the Marines to Lebanon because they were a signatory to the Eisenhower Doctrine.
Well, what exactly is the Eisenhower Doctrine?
The Eisenhower Doctrine was as a matter of fact, it came after the Truman Doctrine. The Eisenhower was the most ambitious doctrine, mainly to support every single capital threatened by communism and to roll back Soviet influence in the world.
Yes.
This is Eisenhower Doctrine. One at the time, the most ambitious doctrine to address the threat of communism and the Soviet Union. And Lebanon, the president, as a Christian, he signed on it.
Yes. So and really a lot of the Muslims weren't very fond of the communists either because they didn't believe in God. One thing also too, that happened under Eisenhower, of course, was Operation Ajax, and they intervened there and overthrew Mossadegh when Mossadegh tried to the British petroleum oil fields.
Well, as I mentioned to you, we spoke about it a little bit. The British, as a matter of fact, United States didn't want to get involved, and the British for 1 year tried to convince us, and finally, we went along with them, and we kind of orchestrated the removal of Mossadegh, the nationalist leader of Iran.
Yeah. Well, Truman, I think, was opposed to, overthrowing a democratically elected leader because they did have, democracy there. And after that, it's like, no, and Eisenhower seemed to be okay with that, even though, one thing I've got to ask, for the specifics, when the British went in and got, drilled for oil, weren't there already people living on this land where the oil was? I mean, did they negotiate a deal with these people and buy the land, or did the British Petroleum just go in and take it? I've long wondered about that, and how did they get? I mean, for example, I've got some rural property, and a gas company wanted to drill for gas. They call us up and say, "Hey, can we drill for gas?" I said, "Sure, you can drill for gas," and then they send us a nice check every month for drilling that gas. But did they give this? Did BP give the individual property owners this kind of deal? Or
well, it might so, but mainly let's not forget. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Listen, as I mentioned to you, it is the British who invaded Iran in 1940, 1941, mainly during the war, and the British had big influence there, really. So I don't think they had a problem telling, the powers or the family there, listen, we are going to explore for oil. I don't think they had a problem. Now, did they pay? Probably they paid, but not enough. You know what I mean? So to keep.
Well, I mean, did they pay? Yeah, I'm not asking whether or not they paid the government. I'm asking, whether or not they paid.
Yeah, well, I think probably. I really don't know the details.
Yeah,
but I would say yes, but not much.
Yeah, and the other thing too, we have
government land mainly. If you have a huge oil field, they will take it from government, or the government will take it.
So we got what happened with the Middle East, but also, we had the, where Nasser in Egypt seizes the Suez Canal, and that was in what, 55?
That was, as a matter of fact, 1956.
Oh, 56. Okay, yeah.
The nationalization of the Suez Canal. Again, this is when Nasser nationalized it, and this is when the British, the French, and the Israeli carried out an attack to retake it back. And this is when Eisenhower called on them to withdraw.
So Eisenhower said, yeah, they can have it. Who was Israel getting a lot of funding from America at the time, or who was funding?
As a matter of fact, Israel had more of a strategic cooperation with France.
Yeah, I've heard France was
with Israel
a lot.
Don't get me wrong, but I myself, after 1967, and especially after 1970, this is when United States started to have a strategic cooperation with Israel. Before that, it was mainly France. France gave him the Mirage fighters, and France really, 1950s, 60s, they were mainly, France gave him a lot of arms, and they were kind of very close.
What was France's interest in getting involved?
Influence in the Middle East.
Okay. So does Israel survive at all without all this aid?
Well, as a matter of fact, I think the Jews really, after what happened to them in World War II, they were fighting for their survival.
Yes.
And I think myself, really, even if you take a look at what happened during their War of Independence, what the Palestinians call the catastrophe. They fought for their independence, for their survival. They knew they had no place else to go. And really, they wanted to stay there. And of course, let's not forget, you have to consider that many of them fought alongside the British forces during World War II. So really, they fought to survive, and they survived.
Okay. So really the next war doesn't really happen until the 6-Day War in 1967.
Correct.
What motivated that?
As a matter of fact, this war, and now you have a lot of declassified document. This war was provoked by the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union gave a false alarm to Nasser that Israel was deploying its army and preparing to invade the Golan Heights. That was completely false. There was no truth about it whatsoever. And Nasser, as a matter of fact, sent really, and you have a documentary now, and it's all out there, the declassified documentaries. And he sent his chief of staff, and they couldn't find anyone deploying. Many of the Israelis were not deploying. But then, the KGB at the time, they said, no, the Israelis are stealthy. They are really concealing their presence. And Nasser was taunted, especially by the nationalists. At the time, you have like social media. Social media was mainly radio. And he was taunted, and he had to save face. You know what I mean? Because he was taunted and he was accused of hiding behind United Nations and Sinai. And he took some bad decision, really, especially closing the Strait of Tiran. Once he closed the Strait of Tiran, this is mainly the venue to Israel. Israel said, listen, I'm going to go ahead and attack. And they attacked. And once they destroyed the Egyptian Air Force, it was open land for them. It was an open land.
So, and of course, for people who may not know, the Golan Heights is actually an area where Israel touches Syria. So it's actually northeastern.
The Golan Heights was in Syria.
Yeah,
it was in Syria, and they took it. The Israeli took it in 1967 war.
Yeah, that's just to let people know where that is, because
the Golan Heights is.
But Nasser was also promoting this pan-Arabism. I mean, he really wanted to unify all these countries together under and so for a while it was Egypt and Syria were actually
Egypt and Syria was part of what's called then the United Arab Republic. But there is a catch-22 here. You have to understand. The Ba'ath parties that entered into that agreement and brought together, the first two Arab nations, and supposedly they were hoping to have more Arabs joining the Arab nation. Nasser would not accept sharing power. And this is why, in 1961, you had a coup d'etat by Damascene officer that forced the secession, mainly forced the withdrawal of Syria from the Union. So mainly pan-Arabism did not work out.
So what was it, and going back to the 60s, what was it like culturally in the Middle East? I mean, did you see women in burqas, or did you see women, dressed like they were in England, in America?
No. You had no women in burqa, no women in veil. Well, I don't know about Egypt, but I know I saw growing up, I know every night we used to have a fight between my mother and my father. My father wanted to watch American movies. He loved Clint Eastwood and Charles Bronson. And my mother wanted to watch Egyptian series. And there were absolutely no niqab, no veil, nothing of that. As a matter of fact, I can tell you this because as a researcher, even in the 1930s and 40s, United States here, it was very conservative. In Egypt at the time, the TV, they had the belly dancers and their belly button is showing. And most of their legs were showing, So it was really absolutely, you did not have the things that you see today. No.
Yeah, a lot of these, dictators and whatever were pretty secular. Or presidents were pretty secular. Mossadegh was secular.
Nasser and Assad and Saddam Hussein, they were all secular.
The Shah was pretty secular. I mean,
all of them secular.
Yeah, they were all secular. Yeah, and Afghanistan was still fairly secular. And then so we go on from there, and then the 6-Day War. Israel takes the Sinai, but then gives it back 12 years later. But that was also, it seemed, when the U.S. started to maybe pump more into Israel. And then, of course, in 73, we had the Yom Kippur War.
Correct.
Yeah. And what was the motivation on that? Just
as a matter of fact, this is when Syria and Egypt, you had Sadat and Hafiz al-Assad, they worked together. and they planned a surprise attack on Israel because they felt that the balance of power shifted heavily in Israel's favor, and they wanted to rectify somehow this balance of power. And they worked together. And the first 2 weeks, as a matter of fact, the Arabs did well overall. And then Israel, thanks to the United States, and of course, thanks to their troops, they were able to reclaim the initiative.
Yeah, and of course, by then, of course, we also have, the Shah, and we have some other things. What else is happening? Anything important?
As a matter of fact, 1979, it was very important year for the United States. 1979, the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, and 1979, Khomeini had revolution in Iran. And these were, as a matter of fact, two important events. And 1979, so on the one hand, on the other hand, the signing, of the peace process between Egypt and Israel.
Yeah, and it seems like America really is just bribing the two countries not to fight each other. I mean, because America gives all this foreign aid to Egypt as well, although not as much as they give to Israel.
Well, as a matter of fact, United States give Israel the most, and second to Egypt.
Yeah,
and this happened mainly, after the peace process.
But there's not been
and still is ongoing.
But there's not been any war between Israel and Egypt since then.
No. And of course, as a matter of fact, well, I would say people to people, you have still some cold peace.
Yeah.
But mainly the leadership, no, they are, as a matter of fact, today you have, I would say, intelligence sharing and a lot of things. As a matter of fact, I think Netanyahu is on his way, or he went to Cairo to go and see, to see if he can, there is a deal to release the hostages.
Yeah, and of course, Israel also somewhere around that, I think, normalized their relations with Jordan. I mean,
yes, as a matter of fact, listen, early on, Israel had a relationship with Jordan before the peace process, but became formalized in 1994 after the Oslo Accord. And now today, the people of Jordan, again, because the majority of them are Palestinians, you have a good number of Islamists, you have a branch of the Muslim Brotherhood there. They are against the peace, but the government, the king, they maintain a good relationship with Israel.
Yeah. Why do you think? We look back and we see Nasser, some of these people were more secular. Why has it gotten to be more religious?
Yeah, decline because they failed. Listen, Arab nationalism failed. And the rulers that came and promised so much to the Arab world, they really did not fulfill their promises. And you have a lot of changes. So you had, mainly the population became restive. Islamism, or political Islam, became, again, a factor in the dynamics, in the domestic and regional politics of the region. And of course, the economies. So you and the Arab-Israeli conflict. So really, you had many factors, and this has led, as a matter of fact, for them to embrace, to start to project themselves as pious Muslims, and to go and seek refuge in Islam, mainly to legitimize themselves. And this is, I think, mainly the reason. And of course, their rule was, was authoritarian rule at the time, and all this conflict. Somehow Islamism or political Islam became a force, in the Arab and Muslim world.
Yeah, and of course Israel, and of course after Iran is taken over by Khomeini, the U.S. I think really kind of pushed, kind of motivated Saddam Hussein to start a war with Iran. And that was
as a matter of fact, United States, I would say so, but mainly the regional countries, Saudi Arabia and others. Again, they were worried about that Khomeini is gonna, export the revolution to their own countries, especially in Iraq, where you have a majority of Shia. So, and Saddam Hussein felt that, with their support, and he felt that with the Iranian regime weak, since the removal since the ousting of the Shah, he felt that he could go in and take over, mainly, or remove at least the Khomeini regime. The first 2 years he did well, and then Iran reclaimed the initiative. And it was a
Yes.
terrible
Yeah.
war. It was one
Yeah.
of the longest war, and hundreds of thousands of people were killed.
Yeah. And then a little later, Israel attacks Lebanon.
Well, in 1982, Israel
Yes.
went into Lebanon. And here, I was serving in the Red Cross then. Israel, as a matter of fact, they invaded for more than one reason. First, you had the PLO, and the PLO became a kingmaker in Lebanon.
Yes.
And the Christians were not happy with the PLO because it kind of meddled in the internal affairs of the countries. And of course, Lebanon was split. Split what? Broadly speaking, the Christian, of Lebanon, they didn't want to be involved in the Arab-Israeli conflict. They knew that the conflict is bigger than them. And on the other hand, the Muslims or the pan-Arabs at the time, or the Arabists, they felt that the Palestinian question is the question or the
Yes.
cause par excellence in the Arab world. So you had, a split in the political leadership. Then in the 1970, when the Jordan kicked out the PLO after their attempt to seize power, they went into Lebanon and they became a force. They became a huge force. And this is really what led to the civil war. So the civil war in Lebanon was about, of course, as we mentioned, the Christian had the upper hand in government. The Muslims were not happy with it. But then the catalysts were the Palestinians and how the Palestinian, when Yasser Arafat moved in. Listen, the south of Lebanon became known as Fatah land, after Fatah, the military wing of the PLO. And so Israel, again, was worried about the PLO and the infiltration into Israel. And they struck a deal, as a matter of fact, with the Christian of Lebanon. And in 1982, finally, they moved in. And I was there, and I saw that, the Israeli were able, to force the PLO from Lebanon. But what happened? You had dynamics change. Bashir Gemayel, Israel's man in Lebanon, and the leaders that really the Christian loved, was assassinated by a pro-Syrian. And after that, everything started to collapse. And Israel withdrew and stayed until 2000 in the buffer zone in south of Lebanon. And Syria occupied Lebanon. Until 2005.
Yes. So we go from there, and then later, we go a little later, and we have, after the U.S. Gives all these niceties to Saddam Hussein in 1990, he decides he needs money and has some loans out, and then he decides, let's invade Kuwait.
And he even because he felt that the Kuwaiti, from his perspective, they stabbed him in the back, because he wanted money. The Kuwait was exceeding its quota, for oil, and you had issues regarding some disputed islands. And Kuwait did not waive, the loans that gave him to Saddam Hussein. And Saddam Hussein really felt that Kuwait, historically, or a big part of Kuwait belonged to Basra province. From his perspective, he said, listen, if you remember, said, well, Kuwait, belonged at one time to Iraq, although you did not have an Iraq then. So he decided to invade. And he so wrongfully read the political map. He read the political map when United States really emerged at the big power, and the Soviet Union was, collapsing, and George Bush was speaking about a new world order, and here Saddam Hussein moved into Kuwait.
Yes.
And this is what led the U.S. to have a coalition, sanctioned by United Nations, to go and extract Iraq from Kuwait.
And Kuwait had never really existed as a country before, right? I mean,
listen, all these here, as I mentioned, these were protectorate by the British. They were sheikdom. Okay. So did they have a political entity? Yes, as tribal, yes.
Yeah.
So you have the Saudi were tribes, the biggest tribe there, and they were able to conquer, Najd al-Hijaz, and proclaim the independence of Saudi Arabia in 1932. So mainly you had the sheikdom, and they had relationship with the British. So here, if you go, for example, you have Al-Sabbah, family in Kuwait. You have Al-Nahyan, and you have Al-Khalifa, you have Al-Saud, you have those big families. And they became rulers of their own sheikdom, and their sheikdoms, their countries. Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, and so Saddam gets kicked out of Kuwait, and then they start putting America starts putting sanctions on Kuwait, on Iraq, and then and then all this happens, and then of course
that was a terrible mistake.
What was a terrible mistake?
By invading Kuwait, because I told you he didn't read the political map.
Yeah.
United States had to be involved, had to intervene.
Yeah. Yes, and so after this. So then we've got a few things happen, but really nothing more significant happens until until those planes hit the World Trade Center on 11 September 2001. And then
September 11, and then you had the war on terrorism.
Yes. And so America first gets involved with Afghanistan.
And then Iraq.
Gets in Iraq, and largely because we had, and at least part of it, we American troops have been on Saudi Arabia before, and Bin Laden said, they're on sacred soil. So from there, we go from there, and Afghanistan ends up being a quagmire, and they're back where they're.
And Iraq too.
Iraq too. Yes, Iraq as well.
Iraq too.
And then later with America, for what was the final motivation for America to get involved with Libya? Because we certainly had.
As a matter of fact, this is the Arab Rebellion. You have the Arab Rebellion, and this is when the Arab League and the French, as a matter of fact, they said, "Listen, here, let me put it in perspective. The Arab League and the United Nations at the time, the United Nations Security Council, they introduced a bill. That bill, China and Russia, they did not vote. Merely, they did not veto it. They were absent. Yes. That bill, it became merely a resolution, was about to protect the Libyan people from the potential aggression of Muammar al-Gaddafi. But what happened now, the Arab League and United States and Qatar played a role, and others, they went and they carried a campaign to remove Saddam Hussein, to remove Muammar al-Gaddafi.
Yes.
And this is what happened. And now Libya is a big mess.
Libya is a big mess. Yes, they have slave auctions now there. They're.
As a matter of fact, it's a split now. You have two areas.
Yeah.
And yes, you had a report a few years ago. I still remember you had slaves, and Libya is, as a matter of fact, the outlet out of which many migrants from the Sahel region in Africa and from North Africa, they like to go to Europe.
Yep. So the USA invades. Yeah, the USA gets involved. Libya, then the USA, and then of course later we get up, to the, and I believe it's 2015. The US gets involved in Syria.
Well, as a matter of fact, we got involved. We tried. Listen, our involvement was before that in Syria.
Okay. Yeah.
And we tried to support, the Syrian opposition. But somehow when we tried to support them, you have a number of them. We found out that once they took their weapons and some money, they kind of had a volte face, and they joined the Islamists. And this is where United States started to be very careful, although we had a presence in Syria, and still that presence is there. And we support, and especially, let's not forget, during this time, 2015, this is when ISIS was there, and we had a United Nations campaign to defeat ISIS.
Yeah.
It started under Obama and it continued under Trump.
Yeah.
And this is where our presence, and we supported the Kurds. And we created, and today we're still supporting them, although the Kurds now are very worried. The Syrian Democratic Forces, these are the Kurds supported by us. They helped us in defeating ISIS. So this is what we have been doing, really. In principle, our presence in Syria is to make sure that ISIS is defeated and ISIS does not emerge.
Yes.
And it was against this background that, Syria went through a lot of things. The jihadis, that they were not defeated, they went to Idlib under the leader now Julani and his group called the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, or HTS. And what happened recently, in 8 to 11 days, they were able to take over the country.
Yes, and of course I forgot to mention, of course, when the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan and got out, the U.S. gave aid to the Mujahideen, which later, gave rise to Osama bin Laden, which was Al Qaeda, which attacked the World Trade Center. What was the origin of Hamas?
Hamas is an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood. It was established in the late 1980s, 1987, if not mistaken. It was an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood by Ahmad Yassin.
Yeah, what was the origin of Hezbollah?
Hezbollah mainly, it adheres to the ideology of Khomeini. Mainly, Khomeini, he introduced a concept, a revolutionary concept called Wilayat al-Faqih, or the rule by the just jurist. So they believe that they should have an Islamic state, and the most senior cleric should rule over this Islamic state. And Hezbollah, as a matter of fact, mainly adhered to this outlook, to this ideology. And Hezbollah came to be supported by Syria, but especially by Iran.
Yeah, and Hezbollah also really originated as a defense against the Israelis attacking back in 1982, and they later attacked Israel, I think, in 2006. So Hezbollah's kind of been at war, and the origin of Hamas really was to be as a counter. Israel supported that really as a counter to the PLO, but now Hamas is biting them in the ass, so to speak.
Well, listen, these are Islamist organization.
Yeah.
And as Islamist organization and their ideology, they can not reconcile themselves with the presence of a Jewish state.
Yes.
And Iran is extremely anti-Israel. You have to understand that, And Hezbollah, if you go back to the 1985, this is when they issued their open letter. In 1985, this is what they said, okay, you have a party now, Hezbollah, and it's Islamist. And their mission is to create an Islamic state. And in that mission statement, they said that they are in a constant fight with the Israelis to obliterate the enemy. So really, Hezbollah was about not only defending, but also about trying to defeat Israel.
Yes.
And they were able, as a matter of fact, to liberate Lebanon from Israel in 2000. Israel withdrew in 2000. But then, after 2000, Hezbollah really acted on its, outlook or mission or ideology, and started to really, weaponize itself, equip itself, train itself. And Iran supported it a lot. It became really a spearhead for Iranian projection of power, really, and it used it as a leverage against Israel. And since Syria occupied Lebanon, again, Hezbollah, listen, in 1990, you have to consider one thing. The war ended in Lebanon. But all militias were dismantled except Hezbollah.
Yeah.
So Hezbollah became the strongest, army, strongest militia. And by the 2000, really, it built a state within a state. So you have to consider one thing, Hezbollah really early on had a lot of issues, or many other non-Hezbollah had a lot of issues with Hezbollah, because they hijacked the decision of peace and war. They became very strong, very influential in the government. And those who spoke against Hezbollah were assassinated either by Syria or by Hezbollah. They worked together. You have the Prime Minister Hariri, you have the Gemayel, and you have many other people who were assassinated. Whoever spoke against Hezbollah, as a matter of fact, they put a target. They became a target. So either they will buy him, they'll get him to his side, and if he or she kept really, against Hezbollah, they had to do something. So really, in Lebanon, the dynamics were really very tense between Hezbollah and especially the rest of the people. And Hezbollah remained the strongest party until very much recently.
Certainly. Who else? Also, I've heard that Hezbollah also does other things, like they have hospitals and they have.
Something about Hezbollah.
Yeah.
Same like Hamas, but better than Hamas. Mainly Hezbollah, to have the support of the Shia because they vote for him. He built, thanks to Iran and whatever they do legally or illegally, they built a huge infrastructure. They had dispensary, they had hospital, they had, as a matter of fact, an organization that will help you even send your children to schools. They have an organization mainly to build, houses. If something got destroyed, it will build it, rebuild it. So really, and the fighter in Hezbollah had a salary better than the soldiers in Lebanon. So really, Hezbollah, other than being a militia, really they created a huge infrastructure, social infrastructure. And that's mainly when I spoke about it and I wrote about it mainly. The Lebanese state really was poor, and Lebanese state or Lebanese governments or the government of Lebanon did not pay attention to the Shia. The Shia really were kind of downtrodden in Lebanon. They forgotten community in Lebanon. And the spoil of the state, until the emergence of Hezbollah, of course, mainly they were for the Christian and for the Sunni Muslims. And this has created a lot of tension.
Certainly. So then, did anything else happen, between Israel and the Palestinians, or not? Is it we pretty much moved up until what happened on 7 October last year?
Well, Hamas. Okay, I can tell you this based on my research and my knowledge of the region.
Yes.
As a matter of fact, you had two leaders. You have Soleimani at the time, the one that United States assassinated in 2020, and you have Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah. They were behind of what's so-called the axis of resistance. And what is that?
Yes.
Mainly for Iran to support proxies around Israel and create what's called the ring of fire. For example, you have Hamas, Islamic Jihad, Hezbollah, the pro-Shia militia in Syria, and Al-Hashd al-Sha'bi, the pro-Iranian militia in Iraq, and the Houthi in Yemen. So that was the deal, as a matter of fact, to create some kind of a ring of fire around Israel. And they really, if you look at their statements, they did believe at a certain point that, they could defeat Israel. Always Israel was described as a spider web, mainly weak. And what happened, based on my research and my contact, Hamas carried out this attack. And the way I see it is that they felt that at the time, Israel, its society was split. You have a lot of demonstration. They felt that was the right time to attack Israel. And they felt that Hezbollah is going to be immediately with them and attack Israel with them. Now, that was a plan, I think, that Iran and Hezbollah and Al-Hashd al-Sha'bi knew about it, but they didn't know the timing of this attack. I think that Sinwar took the decision to attack at this date, and then he expected Hezbollah and the others to be involved in. Now, based on some Israelis, they believe that, one of the things that happened that worked in their favor is that after October 7, Hezbollah did not invade at the same time or the next day, or would have been, the outcome would have been very difficult for Israel. And what happened after that? Immediately after that, Israel, kind of mobilized its army and went after Hamas. And then after that, once they really kind of clipped the wing of Hamas, they moved into Hezbollah. And Hezbollah, really, the Israelis, they have been planning to hit Hezbollah for quite some time. After the 2006, which we call it the inconclusive war. You had, let's not forget, a shadow war between Hezbollah, Iran, or Iran and its proxy, and Israel. And Israel and them, they have been preparing for this war. But Israel came to be the smarter. Israel relied on technology. Israel intelligence were better. And listen, they waited almost a year, as Hezbollah, kind of said, listen, I am supporting Hamas. And let's not forget, in October 7, you have the attack. October 8, true that Hezbollah did not invade Israel, but acted, as a supportive of the Hamas war and firing rocket. Israel waited 1 year, almost 1 year, and then they had the pager, explosions, which really it was it hit Hezbollah hard. 4,000 of the what they call the first rank of Hezbollah members were somehow maimed or lost their hands or became deeply,
yes,
and then came the walkie-talkie, and then came the attacks, and they knew everything about Hezbollah. So meaning they knew exactly their tunnels, they knew where their leaders are, and Israel was able to eliminate the first rank and second rank of Hezbollah's leaders.
Okay, so yeah, and so we recently had the fall of Assad. Where do you think that's going to go in Syria?
Well, as a matter of fact, now Syria, and this is again partly what explained, other than the Islamists have been preparing themselves and Turkey supporting the Islamists. But if you look, for the past year or more than a year, Israel has been hitting and has been trying to prevent Hezbollah, to prevent the Iranians from creating a scenario in Syria similar to one that they created in Lebanon. So they have been hitting convoys, Iranian headquarters, Hezbollah headquarters, military equipments, and all these things. And then really somehow, the time came where Syria became weak. And I think that Turkey and Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, that we spoke about it, HTS, they found that the moment was ripe to go and go toward Damascus.
Yeah.
And this is what they did. And by 8 days, they were in Damascus. By the 11th day, the whole Syrian army, the Syrian government, all collapsed. And now what do you have? You have a Julani. Now his true name is Ahmad al-Shara.
Yeah.
And you have a lot of concerns now. He was part of Al-Qaeda. He rebranded himself, or he changed, and he created Tahrir al-Sham. And now if you look at him, all his statements are moderate. He met with the Druze, he met with the Christians, or at least some of his people met with the Christians. And his statement is, Syria is for all. But at the same time, you have fightings now going on. And United States managed now recently, as a matter of fact, today, managed to create some kind of a detente, some kind of a truce between the Kurds and between those Islamists who are supported by Turkey. But I think that really you have a danger, and the danger, and these are the concern that what kind of rule, Al-Julani or, the rebels they are going to impose on Syria, they are going to have in Syria. Really, many countries, especially us, we worry about he's going to have an Islamist government. It remains to be seen, although I have my suspicion that he might likely create a quasi-Islamist government. You have, again, the serious challenge or the serious threat is, again, a war between the Kurds and those rebels. And this is happening, as a matter of fact, and now it's stopped. And again, mainly Julani or Ahmad al-Shara and his group, mainly what he says, it doesn't mean that the other groups affiliated with him, they are going to agree with him. So you have a lot of fluidity. But, thus far, somehow you have cautious optimism in Syria. Now, and I have to tell you this, you have now the Western world. United States made contact with him. The British, you had envoy there. The French had envoy there. The German had envoy there. United Nations had envoy there. So now I see that the rebels, they are being little by little, or their legitimization became nearly complete, not fully complete, nearly complete. So now we're going to see what's going to happen. Their action is going to tell us what's going to happen in Syria.
Certainly. So what role has Turkey played in all of this?
Turkey is the main supporter of the HTS, mainly the rebels. Yeah. And Turkey today has the biggest leverage now in Syria, and the Iranians has lost their leverage, and the Russians, they have lost their leverage. And of course, Hezbollah lost its leverage.
Yeah,
so really now, the main political actor with leverage in Syria is the Turk.
Yeah. So what has Russia's role been in all this? I mean, generally they've they've generally been on, I think, whatever the opposite side of the U.S. is.
Listen, Chris, Syria has been historically in the Soviet orbit. Let's not forget that. And they have now today, you have two big bases, and they created what they call the Russian Eastern Mediterranean Lake. Their involvement in Libya, they were from Syria. Syria was too important for them. It's a big presence. Now they withdrew all their equipment from those bases, and they are leaving Syria. They kind of, the rebels took over. And let's not forget, it was the Russians who supported the Assad regime. The Russians who really kind of were a pillar for the Assad regime to maintain its rule. Them and the Iranians. And now he lost. This is it.
Has China played any role in all of this?
No, China, did not.
Okay. One thing I never touched on too, what's the deal with Cyprus?
Cyprus, vis-a-vis Turkey?
Half Greek, half Turk, or it seems like it's half Greek or half Turk,
Turkey, Cyprus is a split.
Yeah, it's actually
split between the Greek Cypriot and between the Turkish. Yeah. Really, this is what it is. And it has been like this for quite some time.
Yeah.
I was in Cyprus years ago, and I went to the Greek Cypriot place. I didn't go to the Turkish place. It's a split, and it remains a split. And the part that is under the Greek Cypriot, it's part of the EU.
Certainly, yes. So and also what we've covered, I think, most of these countries. Can you comment on the situation with Armenia and Azerbaijan and what's been going on there?
I can comment. I did a lot of. As a matter of fact, listen, you have an area for the Armenian called Artsakh. Yeah. For the Azeri and other is called Nagorno-Karabakh. Yes. You have a minority of Armenian. It's an enclave within Azerbaijan, but it's an Armenian enclave. You know what I mean? And they always had their contact with Armenia. Now, what happened recently is that the Turks supported them, the Israelis supported them, and the Russians, especially after the Ukraine war, somehow they shifted their policy. At first, they were supporting the Armenians, but then they played a kind of a neutral role. Well, neutral role does not work there. And little by little, the Azeri, they became powerful enough, and they forced the Armenians from Artsakh. Yeah. And now, all this enclave now is in the hand of the Azeri, of the Azerbaijan government.
Yeah, and
this is what's happening. Now, who support the Armenian? They supported the Iranians supported them.
Yeah, because there's also an Azeri population in Iran.
In Iran, you have big Azeri. Yes, correct.
Was that land always Armenian? I mean, how did it get drawn as being part of Azerbaijan? I've heard that was under
this enclave, what's called Nagorno-Karabakh, have been for years, decades, centuries. You have Armenian there. But listen, in these countries surrounding it, you had Azeri. And once the Soviet Union fell apart, what do you have now? You had Azerbaijan here and, Artsakh or Nagorno-Karabakh within Azerbaijan, but it has its autonomy. You know what I mean? Yeah. Or, the Armenians took care of themselves. Yeah. Little by little, you have wars. You have more than one round of fighting. And in the last round, this is where, the Russians, especially after the Ukraine war, played a neutral role. They were mainly the guarantor of some kind of a peace or truce between the Armenian and the Azeri. As this did not work out, the Azeri took weapons from Israel, took weapons from Turkey. Turkey supported them, and they were able, to gain the upper hand. And as we saw recently, they were able to force the Armenians from their enclave in Nagorno-Karabakh.
What do you anything to say about some of the other largely Muslim regions in the Caucasus region, like Chechnya or Kyrgyzstan, or anything like that?
Well, I can tell you this: Chechnya is under Russia. Mainly, it's part of Russia. And you have the Kadyrov. The Kadyrov are mainly, they are Chechens, but they are 100% Russians.
Yes.
Now, what United States is interested, and this is where China is moving in, Central Asian countries, in Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan,
Yeah.
Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan.
Yes.
Why? Why? Because it's mainly they are Muslim there, and mainly Muslim Sunni. Their background, you have a good ethnic Turkish background. They have oil, they have water, and they have minerals, a lot of minerals. So they were close, during the Soviet Union, of course, to Russia. Russia has a close cooperation with their leaders based on security, but China has moved in. This is where China has moved, and through its soft power, mainly the Silk Road. They build infrastructure, they invest there. So this is where you have now a kind of rivalry between, yes, Russia and China. They are friends, but over there, China is moving in, and United States feel that these countries, they are somehow falling under the influence of China. So it's something similar to what's happening in Africa, the North Pole, and Latin America, where China has moved in, and now it has some influence. I would say it have influence there, and in some areas more influence than us.
Is it true, right now that there is a genocide of Uyghurs going on in Western China, or what?
Well, as a matter of fact, some I would say that I really don't know. This is where really you have to listen to really narratives. I think really the Chinese, they are really clamping down on the Uyghurs that they want merely to secede from China. And China, of course, China is a totalitarian country. Really, it doesn't want to have any opposition. And I think, yes, they are clamping down on them. Now, to say genocide, I really don't know if they are committing genocide. I read article that would say yes. I read articles no. I am not sure 100%. But for clamping down on them, I know they are clamping down on them.
Well, history does teach us that China likes genocides, but anyway, one other group that doesn't get much attention on it, and I don't know if you know much about this one. What is the situation with the Rohingya in Burma or Myanmar?
Okay, the Rohingya Muslims,
this is the one Muslim. It seems like it seems like nobody else in the Muslim.
I can tell you this because I teach it in my ethnic conflict class sometimes, not all the time. The Rohingya Muslim, as a matter of fact, Burma or they are the Burmese. The Burmese are mainly they are Buddhist.
Yes.
And what happened, as a matter of fact, they believe if you are not a Buddhist, you are not a Burmese, you are not a nationalist. In order to be a nationalist, you have to be a Buddhist. Yes. Now, the Rohingya Muslims, they are Bengali, as they've been there for generations. But those nationalists, including the monks or some monks, they believe that they don't belong there. They are not Burmese. And you had a problem with them, and they want to force them from their area, and this is what's happening. So many of them became boat people. They became living in port. Now the problem is they tried to go to Bangladesh, and Bangladesh could not have them all or could not have many. Now really Bangladesh going through tough time, and some of them left, for example, to Malaysia or Indonesia, but still, they are facing a lot of persecution.
Yeah. It seems like
now you have in the international community, United Nations, they spoke about them, but you don't have definitive action taken to protect the Rohingya Muslims.
It seems like maybe they could just redraw the boundaries, and where the Rohingya is, they could be part of Bangladesh instead of be part of.
No, it's not going to happen.
But that's not going to happen.
It will never. It will never. The junta there, the Burmese junta will never allow this. Absolutely. As a matter of fact, they want them out. Listen, you had many villages for the Rohingyans were burned, and the homes of the Rohingyans were burned, were set on fire.
Yeah. What I should also ask. You have been such a wealth of information here. There's just one of those things popped in my head. What was the cause of the split in Sudan?
All right. Well, you have three splits in Sudan. In
Okay.
Sudan, you have the north and the south. The north is
Yeah.
Muslim, the south is Christian,
Yes.
and the north was taking mainly most of the oil from the south.
Yeah.
So you had totally different. They had the war going on, and now the south is independent. But then you have the
Yeah.
other problem. This is where you have a genocide, and
Yeah.
this is where, as a matter of fact, Colin Powell, at the time he spoke about genocide with the Darfurian. You had an area called Darfur. They are Muslims, but they are
Yes.
not
Before.
Muslim Arabs. And you have fighting for resources, and especially with desertification, with dearth of rainfall. This created a problem, and and indeed the government of Sudan it unleashed hell against the Darfurian, and many of them were killed. And as a matter of fact, al-Bashir at the time, the previous ruler, was accused, as a matter of fact, of crimes by the ICC. So today, still, this is ongoing, and you have a big problem there. It's not ongoing at the same pace as before. It's less, but still, you have a conflict ongoing there, and you don't have a final solution. You have some regional countries are involved, United Nations is involved, but still, it's part of the world, really, that the world is not really looking at, really. And this is a sad thing. Certain area, the international community or the world, they have an interest in, they look at, and some area like Darfur in Sudan, it doesn't really kind of have the attention, really, and the, to have some kind of a solution. So really, the Darfurian today, as before, they are facing a lot of problems, and they are living in misery.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, it's certainly been. So yeah, where do you think where do you think it all goes from here? Then do you think how do you think the Israel's current tensions will resolve?
Well, as a matter of fact, Israel today has dealt really, with their opponents well.
Yeah.
Hezbollah and Iran pose their biggest threat. And Hezbollah today no longer, I think now, pose a threat to Israel as it did before. And Syria, which was really a kind of a nodal point, extremely important for what I call the axis of resistance, that regime is gone. Now, we don't know what's going to happen next with the Islamists. The Islamists, of course, they are no fan of Israel. And theologically, ideologically, they are against the Jews and they are against Israel. But Ahmad al-Shari' now said, listen, I have nothing to do now with Israel. Regarding Iran, I think Iran today, the president, again, after what happened, he's kind of sending all messages that he would like to have some kind of a resolution. Yeah. So Israel's position today is better than before.
Yeah. What is life like if you're a Palestinian or an Arab living in Israel or in, Gaza or the West Bank right now?
Okay, well, you have a difference, West Bank, Gaza, and Israeli Arab. Israeli Arab, you have all the benefit of being a citizen. You can vote, you can be a deputy in the parliament, you can be. Now, the only thing for the Arabs, Muslims especially, you don't serve in the army. And if you don't serve in the army, you don't have the benefits that the others do. But I think over the overall, their situation in Israel is better than the Palestinian in Lebanon or the Palestinian in anywhere else in the Arab world. They have rights and they can really become, as I mentioned to you, leaders. They can become, they have senior position there. In the West Bank and Gaza, it's totally different. Gaza has been run by Hamas, and Hamas is Islamist. Hamas really, I think myself, it brought misery to the Palestinian. As a matter of fact, I believe sometimes I feel that what Hamas did on October 7, it harmed so much the Palestinian cause, you have no idea. In the West Bank, and of course it's Hamas, really. Now, in the West Bank, you have some problems. Yes, Palestinian would like to have their independence, but something happened with the Palestinian. The leadership has been corrupt for quite some while, and especially with the absence of the peace process, the tension between the Palestinian and the Jews, this has really kind of did not lead to the resumption of peace negotiation. So really, it's not good what's happening there. Really, from an Israeli and Palestinian perspective. And of course, you don't have, the Palestinians, they don't speak in one voice. You have the West Banker and you have the Gazans. And today, as a matter of fact, I really think that the situation is not good at all, especially after what happened on October 7th.
Okay, well, this has been a fascinating conversation.
Thank you, Chris.
It's
a long conversation.
You did not disappoint. I love looking at the whole picture, and everything is always just. It's never as simple as you think it is, and just the nuance, the languages. It's really, but you certainly had a wealth of knowledge, and I hope we can have some peace and stability.
I hope to. I really hope to, Chris. Thank you very much for having me.
I've only known a few people from Lebanon, but they've been just absolutely wonderful people. It's always
thank you.
Of course, and I always think of Jamie Farr on as MASH, because I watched MASH. So
yeah,
and he's Lebanese. It's,
yes.
It's so it's a
yes. Thank
you. And of course Danny Thomas also. The
Danny Thomas, Farah Fawcett.
Yeah.
And others and many of them, they are. But as I mentioned, they come here and they become really assimilated. And Lebanon is a heritage. My children, they know about Lebanon, but it's a heritage. Their country is United States, and they love it here. And Lebanon, probably they love it. They love to eat some Lebanese food, to meet with each other.
Yeah, well, that's the one. That's the wonderful thing about immigrants. They always bring recipes with them. Oh,
I know. Hey,
let's make us food. Yeah, sure.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, listen,
food cuisines.
It's a ritual to sit down at a table. It's not only the food; it's a ritual.
Yeah,
you have the people, you enjoy the food, and you enjoy the company.
Yeah, it seems as though maybe at one time sitting down to dinner was a ritual, and now we just we treat it like a ritual a few days a year, but then we just don't really think of it as something special. It was just it was a family
with the
meeting
Lebanese community. As a matter of fact, it's still. I really myself in my household. I really would like to sit down at the dinner table. Whenever I can, not all the time. Whenever I can, to be honest.
Yeah, have food. Yeah, because people have food wherever it goes, and it's amazing just the different way people eat.
Listen, food. It's attraction. It's something that bring people together.
Yeah, yes, it definitely is. You just all sit down and have a feast together. Maybe we can bring up some peace. It's a
exactly. I fully agree.
Yeah, it's a big world. I've only visited. I visited Armenia, and I visited, as I like to call it, Sakartvelo, or we call it Georgia. It's two wonderful countries. That's the closest I've gotten here. But and in Armenia, in their language, they call it Hayastan. And so
I lived with Armenians. We lived with them in Lebanon, in East Beirut.
Oh yeah, they're wonderful people. Yeah, it seems like it's unfortunate, but it seems like there's definitely been a scattering of Armenians, and those are two countries that still have their own unique alphabets. I mean, it's so. I hate to. Somebody once said to me, it seems like everything that's been happening here is just really about, and everything the U.S. has done really since the end of the Cold War has just been about fighting Orthodox Christians, and it seems like all of this fighting the Christians in the Middle East are the biggest losers.
Well. Sadly, as a matter of fact, especially with Islamism, look at Iraq, most of the Christian left. In Syria, most of the Christian left. In Lebanon, they are a minority. They didn't leave, but they are no longer a majority or a plurality. And it's sad, and I hope in the future their situation will be more peaceful so they could stay and enjoy the culture of the Middle East. Listen, the Middle East is rich in culture, rich in people, rich in diversity, but also it's rich in conflicts.
Yeah, also there was that that group in Iraq called the Assyrians.
Yeah, you have the Assyrian and the Chaldeans.
Yeah,
it's the same church, but that church is split It used to be Assyrians. And then a group of them split and followed the Pope, and they became called the Chaldeans.
Yeah, it's really,
and now they are at you used to have over 3 million something Christian in Iraq. Now you have less than 500,000 now.
Yeah, where are all the Christians going? I mean,
many here go to Detroit, go to United States, go
to
Sweden.
That was where Congressman Justin Amash came from. He had some cousins who got killed in this whole mess. The recent conflict. There was that old church that was bombed. It's really
this one ISIS. Many Christians were killed, and
I
many
don't
Christians
know why. I mentioned those two countries. I mean, I think that's the closest I'm ever going to get to the Middle East, because I just don't know if I'd ever feel safe there. If I've heard nice things about Oman, which kind of interests me.
Listen, the Gulf. All the Gulf is good.
Yeah,
and really they treat American very well.
Yeah.
Okay. And you have security there.
Yeah.
Really the Gulf, and this is why the Gulf now really, they don't want wars, they want stability. They don't want war. They don't want Israel to fight with Iran or Iran fighting with them. Now you have, especially it's led by Mohammed bin Salman and others, they really don't want war. They care about their stability. Their number one priority now, stability in the Gulf. And they are doing very well. Their economies today is doing very well.
Yeah, let's hope that happens. I hope we can get some stability, and please. Where can we find you out there on the web? I found your Wikipedia page, and
I have a Twitter account. I'm active and not active,
yes.
But I have at Robert G. Rabil, this Twitter, and my Facebook, Robert Rabil and Robert G. Rabil. I have a page and a
Yes.
profile account. And and I have, again, which I did not update, I have my own website, Robert Rabil also, which I list my books, I list my review. It's not updated, but you have tons of information there. But Facebook and Twitter are very good now. Twitter and Facebook.
And you have that wonderful quote from Jefferson on your Twitter.
Yes, this is my website, of course. I like that.
In matters of style, swim with the current. In matters of principle, stand like a rock.
Exactly. Absolutely.
Yes. Absolutely. Yes, if you admire Thomas Jefferson, that means you're a great man. Yeah. So,
as a matter of fact, my first course in my graduate studies was on Thomas Jefferson.
Yeah, and Thomas Jefferson would say that America should not be involved anywhere. Just
this is as a matter of fact. Let's see now what's going to happen with the new administration, with Trump, and I hope we'll find peace, especially in Ukraine, between Ukraine and Russia and the Middle East. Let's hope. I'm really hoping that somehow those areas will find some stability. I really hope so.
Yeah, I hope so well too. Yeah, we'll see. It's a big world out there. So please like this video, subscribe to the channel, buy my novel Escape from the Village, go to Buy Me a Coffee and support the show, and and check out my Substack, although I've been remiss with it lately. Thank you, Robert Rabil.
Thank you very much, Chris. All the best. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you again. Bye.
Out. Buy my novel Escape from the Village from major booksellers online. Go to escapevillage.com. Subscribe to the Substack. Go to fountainheadforum.substack.com. Support the forum. Go to buymeacoffee.com/fountainheadforum. Thank you.